Alright people, gather round because what I'm about to share with you today isn't your average news headline. It's a deep, dark dive into the underbelly of power. A shocking expose that peels back the layers of a system many thought was designed for liberation, but has, for some, become a personal goldmine. We're talking about South Africa, a nation of incredible promise, resilience, and beauty, but one that's also been wrestling with a monster, a hydra of corruption that seems to grow new heads every time one is supposedly severed. It's a story that needs to be told, not with glee, but with a heavy heart and a demand for answers, because the stakes are just too high. We're going to be looking at some of the most powerful figures, individuals who have allegedly stood at the apex of this intricate web of deceit and self-enrichment, figures who are entrusted with the dreams of a nation, only to, as alleged by numerous reports, commissions, and whistleblowers, auction them off to the highest bidder. These aren't just abstract accusations, these are stories backed by mountains of evidence, by brave souls who dared to speak out, often at great personal risk. And trust me, the scale of what's been happening, the audacity of it all is something that will leave you shaking your head. You won't believe who's really pulling the strings. This isn't just about politics. It's about the very soul of a country, about the stolen opportunities, the compromised institutions, and the erosion of public trust that follows when leaders allegedly put their own pockets before the people they swore to serve. We're going to name names, we're going to connect the dots, and we're going to lay bare the mechanisms that have allowed this alleged looting to flourish. It's a tough conversation, but it's one we absolutely need to have if there's any hope of charting a different course for the future. So, buckle up, because this is going to be one hell of a ride into the heart of South Africa's corruption saga. Let's start at the top, or rather with someone who recently occupied the very highest office in the land, former President Jacob Zuma. Now, Jacob Zuma's story is complex, a journey from freedom fighter to the presidency, a path that many hoped would solidify the gains of democracy. However, his tenure became increasingly synonymous not just with political controversy, but with a staggering array of corruption allegations that have cast a long, dark shadow over his legacy, and indeed over the country itself. It's like watching your favorite superhero slowly turn into the villain, confusing, heartbreaking, and deeply concerning for the citizens he once promised to protect. The list of accusations against Zuma is extensive, almost a saga in itself. We're talking about the infamous Nkandla homestead upgrades, where millions of rands of public money were allegedly splurged on his private residence under the guise of security enhancements. Think swimming pools becoming fire pools. Then there's the long-running arms deal scandal, a specter from his earlier political career that continues to haunt him, with charges of fraud, corruption, and racketeering. These aren't just minor missteps. These are allegations that strike at the very core of public trust and financial propriety, raising serious questions about accountability at the highest levels. But perhaps the most pervasive cloud hanging over the Zuma presidency is its deep entanglement with what's become known as state capture. This is where private interests, most notably the Gupta family, whom we'll get to shortly, allegedly managed to exert undue influence over state decisions, appointments, and, crucially, state-owned enterprises. Think of it as the state itself being hijacked, its resources diverted, its institutions weakened, all to allegedly benefit a select few. The Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture laid bare countless testimonies detailing how this network supposedly operated, with Zuma often portrayed as a central enabler, a gatekeeper who allegedly opened the doors for this plunder. The impact of these alleged actions during his presidency has been devastating for South Africa. We've seen state-owned enterprises like Eskom and Transnet, once pillars of the economy, hollowed out and brought to their knees largely due to mismanagement and corrupt dealings. This in turn has had a direct impact on ordinary South Africans. Load shedding, failing infrastructure, and a struggling economy are all part of this bitter harvest. The social fabric too has been frayed as cynicism and disillusionment have taken root where hope once blossomed. It's a stark reminder that corruption isn't a victimless crime. Its tendrils reach into every corner of society. Despite leaving office, Jacob Zuma continues to be a prominent and often polarizing figure. His legal battles are ongoing, a constant stream of court appearances, appeals, and political maneuvering that keeps the nation on edge. His supporters see him as a victim of a political witch hunt, while his detractors view him as the embodiment of the corruption that has plagued the country. Regardless of one's perspective, The sheer volume of allegations and the evidence presented in various forums paint a deeply troubling picture of a leader who, at best, presided over a period of unprecedented looting and, at worst, was an active participant. The story of Jacob Zuma serves as a crucial, if painful, lesson in the importance of strong institutions, vigilant oversight, and the undeniable truth that no individual should ever be above the law. The alleged scale of corruption during his time in office underscores the immense challenge South Africa faces in uprooting these deeply embedded networks and ensuring that such a period is never repeated. It's a chapter that demands not just reflection, but resolute action to rebuild what has been broken and to restore faith in the promise of a truly democratic and accountable government for all its citizens. Now, if Jacob Zuma was allegedly the enabler at the highest level, then the Gupta family, Ajay, Atul, and Rajesh were, according to a mountain of evidence and testimony, the ambitious architects and primary beneficiaries of state capture. This family, originally from India, arrived in South Africa in the early 1990s, starting with a relatively modest shoe business, and then, almost astoundingly, managed to build a sprawling business empire that seemed to have an uncanny knack for securing lucrative government contracts and cultivating friends in very high places. It's like they had the cheat codes to the South African economy. Their influence, as detailed extensively by whistleblowers in the Zondo Commission, allegedly extended deep into the heart of government. We're talking about allegations of them summoning ministers, dictating cabinet appointments, and essentially treating state-owned enterprises as their personal piggy banks. Key state institutions like the energy giant Eskom, the transport utility Transnet, and the defense firm Denel were reportedly infiltrated and systematically plundered through rigged tenders, inflated contracts, and a complex web of shell companies designed to launder money and obscure the illicit flow of funds. It was a masterclass in alleged grand corruption, executed with breathtaking audacity. One of the most infamous examples of their alleged modus operandi is the Estina Dairy Farm project in Vrede, Free State. This project was meant to empower emerging black farmers, a noble goal in a country still grappling with the economic legacies of apartheid. However, it's alleged that hundreds of millions of rands allocated to this project were siphoned off, with a significant portion ending up in Gupta-linked accounts, while the intended beneficiaries were left with virtually nothing. The lavish Gupta wedding at Sun City, partly funded by these diverted funds, became a grotesque symbol of this alleged theft from the poor. The Guptas' close relationship with then-President Zuma and his family was, by many accounts, central to their ability to operate with such impunity. Dudu Myeni Zuma, the former president's son, was a prominent director in many Gupta-owned companies, further blurring the lines between the state and private interests. This proximity allegedly gave them unparalleled access and influence, allowing them to manipulate state processes for their own gain. They didn't just want a seat at the table, they allegedly wanted to own the table, the chairs, and the entire restaurant, with the state picking up the tab. When the extent of their alleged influence and the scale of the looting began to surface, thanks to brave investigative journalists and whistleblowers leaking the infamous Gupta Leaks emails, public outrage reached a boiling point. The pressure mounted, and the Guptas eventually fled South Africa in 2018, leaving behind a trail of depleted state coffers and shattered public trust. They are currently fugitives from justice, with extradition processes underway, though the wheels of international law often turn frustratingly slowly, leaving many South Africans wondering if they will ever truly be held accountable for their alleged crimes. The saga of the Gupta family is a stark illustration of how vulnerable a state can become when checks and balances are weakened, and when powerful individuals are allowed to cultivate parasitic relationships with those in political office. Their story is not just about financial greed, it's about the systematic undermining of democratic institutions, the betrayal of public trust on an epic scale, and the profound damage inflicted upon a nation striving to build an equitable future. It's a chilling reminder that the fight against corruption requires constant vigilance against those who seek to capture the state for personal enrichment. Next up, we turn our attention to Ace Magashule, a figure who wielded immense power within the ruling African National Congress, or ANC, as its Secretary General, one of the most influential positions in the party, and by extension, in the country. Before that, he served a lengthy tenure as the premier of the Free State Province, a period that has come under intense scrutiny for alleged widespread corruption and maladministration. Think of him as the party's chief administrator, someone who should be upholding its principles but instead found himself mired in serious allegations of graft. Magashule's name became particularly prominent in connection with the Free State asbestos audit scandal. This was a multi-million rand contract awarded during his time as premier, ostensibly to identify and remove dangerous asbestos roofing from low-income houses, a vital public health initiative, right? Well, it's alleged that the contract was riddled with irregularities, massively inflated, and that little to no actual work was done. Instead, the funds were allegedly siphoned off through a network of connected individuals and companies, a textbook case of public funds being looted while the poor and vulnerable were left exposed to hazardous materials. The allegations against Magashule in this 255 million rand asbestos deal are serious, leading to his eventual arrest and charges of fraud, corruption, and money laundering. This was a significant moment, seeing such a high-ranking party official facing the might of the law, though the legal process, as is often the case in such high-profile matters, has been protracted and complex. His suspension from the ANC Secretary-General position followed, a move that sent shockwaves through the political landscape and highlighted the deep factional battles raging within the ruling party over issues of corruption and accountability. Beyond the asbestos scandal, Magashule's tenure as Free State Premier was dogged by numerous other accusations of patronage, tenderpreneurship, and the creation of a powerful political machine that allegedly benefited his allies and stifled dissent. Projects like the aforementioned Estina dairy farm also fell under his premiership, further implicating his provincial administration in the broader state capture narrative. It paints a picture of a province where the lines between party, state, and personal enrichment were allegedly dangerously blurred, creating an environment ripe for exploitation. Magashule has consistently denied any wrongdoing, often portraying himself as a victim of political infighting and a targeted campaign to remove him from power because of his particular political stance, often associated with the radical economic transformation faction. However, the sheer weight of testimony and evidence presented at the Zondo Commission and in various investigative reports has raised profound questions about his leadership and stewardship of public resources. His case became a litmus test for the ANC's stated commitment to rooting out corruption from within its own ranks. The saga of Ace Magashule underscores the insidious nature of corruption when it takes hold within provincial structures and party machinery. It's a reminder that the fight for accountability must extend beyond the national stage into every sphere of governance. The alleged plundering of resources meant for the poorest citizens, as seen in the asbestos scandal, is a particularly egregious betrayal of public trust, and his story serves as a cautionary tale about the long shadows cast when political power is allegedly abused for personal and factional gain. Now this one might surprise some because President Cyril Ramaphosa came into office on a wave of optimism, promising a new dawn and a decisive break from the state capture era that characterized his predecessor's term. He positioned himself as the reformer, the man who would clean house and restore integrity to government. And indeed, some important steps have been taken, like the strengthening of the National Prosecuting Authority and the work of the Zondo Commission, which he initiated. But, and it's a significant but, his presidency has not been without its own serious controversies and allegations, proving that the path to a corruption-free South Africa is far from straightforward. The most prominent shadow hanging over Ramaphosa's presidency is undoubtedly the Fala Fala farm scandal. This story, which broke in 2022, involves a large sum of foreign currency, reportedly millions of US dollars, allegedly stolen from his private game farm, Fala Fala, in Limpopo. The controversy isn't just about the theft itself, but about the source of the money, why it was allegedly hidden in furniture, whether it was declared to the relevant authorities, and the subsequent alleged cover-up of the robbery, which reportedly involved unofficial investigations and even cross-border pursuits. It's a narrative that just keeps getting more complicated. The Fala Fala affair has raised a multitude of uncomfortable questions for a president who staked his reputation on transparency and accountability. How did such a large amount of cash end up on his property? Was it proceeds from legitimate game sales as claimed, and if so, were all tax and foreign exchange regulations adhered to? Why was the theft not formally reported to the South African Police Service in the standard way? These are questions that have fueled parliamentary inquiries, investigations by the public protector, and intense public debate, creating a cloud of suspicion that has been difficult for him to shake off. Beyond Falafela, Ramaphosa has also faced scrutiny regarding donations to his CR17 campaign for the ANC presidency. While he was cleared of deliberately misleading Parliament by the Constitutional Court, the saga exposed the opaque nature of political party funding in South Africa and raised concerns about potential influence peddling by donors. It highlighted the complex interplay between money and politics, even for a leader ostensibly committed to clean governance. It's like trying to clean a very dirty house while some are still tracking mud through the hallway. Critics argue that while Ramaphosa talks a good game on fighting corruption, the pace of prosecutions against high-profile individuals implicated in state capture has been slow, and that some within his own party and government who face serious allegations continue to hold positions of power. This has led to accusations that his anti-corruption drive is selective or hampered by the need to maintain unity within a deeply factionalized ANC. The challenge, it seems, is not just identifying corruption, but effectively and impartially prosecuting it, regardless of political affiliation. President Ramaphosa finds himself in a precarious position, tasked with leading the fight against corruption, while simultaneously battling allegations that threaten to undermine his own credibility. His supporters would argue he's navigating an incredibly difficult political terrain, trying to dismantle deeply entrenched corrupt networks, while facing resistance from within his own ranks. However, the unresolved questions surrounding Falafela in particular serve as a potent reminder that even those who champion reform must themselves be held to the highest standards of transparency and accountability. The new dawn is still struggling to fully break through the clouds. Let's talk about Dudu Myeni, a name that became almost inextricably linked with the decline of South African Airways, the national airline. During her tenure as chairperson of the SAA board, from 2012 to 2017, the airline lurched from one crisis to another, accumulating massive financial losses and becoming a symbol of mismanagement and alleged corruption. Myeni, known for her close relationship with former President Jacob Zuma, presided over a period that saw SAA descend deeper into turbulence, not from bad weather, but from allegedly disastrous decisions and a culture of impunity. Under Myeni's leadership, SAA was plagued by a series of questionable deals, high executive turnover, and accusations of political interference. Critical strategic decisions, such as route cancellations and aircraft procurement deals, often seemed to defy business logic, raising suspicions that they were being driven by ulterior motives rather than the best interests of the airline. For instance, her alleged interference in a lucrative Emirates codeshare deal, which could have significantly benefited SAA, and her push for a less favorable, obscure deal, drew widespread condemnation and scrutiny from National Treasury. The Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture heard extensive testimony detailing Myeni's alleged destructive role at SAA. Witnesses described an environment of fear and intimidation, where those who dared to question her decisions or resist improper instructions faced reprisal. She was accused of running the airline like a personal fiefdom, prioritizing personal connections and loyalty over competence and good governance. The commission heard how she allegedly shared confidential SAA information with external parties and sought to manipulate procurement processes to benefit favored individuals or companies. The financial impact on SAA during her watch was calamitous. The airline required multiple government bailouts, costing taxpayers billions of rands just to stay airborne. This wasn't just poor business performance, it was, as alleged by many, a direct consequence of systemic governance failures and corruption that hollowed out the institution. In 2020, the High Court declared Dudu Myeni a delinquent director for life, a scathing judgment that found her to have been dishonest and to have knowingly caused harm to SAA. It was a landmark ruling, holding a high-profile SOE board chair accountable for her actions. Myeni, throughout the controversies and legal challenges, has largely maintained her innocence, often suggesting she was unfairly targeted. However, the evidence presented against her, both in court and at the Zondo Commission, painted a damning picture of her stewardship. Her close association with Jacob Zuma, she was also chairperson of his Jacob G. Zuma Foundation, frequently led to speculation that her power and perceived impunity stemmed from this political protection, allowing her to act without fear of consequence for far too long. The story of Dudu Myeni and SAA serves as a stark case study of what can happen when a critical state-owned enterprise falls under the influence of individuals who allegedly prioritize personal agendas and patronage networks over sound management and public interest. The billions lost could have been invested in essential services, but instead, they were seemingly squandered, grounding not just an airline, but also the hopes of many for well-run, efficient public entities. It's a painful lesson in the devastating cost of failed oversight and unchecked power at the helm of SOEs. If there's one state-owned enterprise whose woes have directly and painfully impacted almost every South African, it's Eskom, the national power utility. And at the heart of Eskom's decline during the state capture era stands Brian Molefe, its former CEO. Molefe, once lauded as a turnaround specialist at Transnet, took the helm of Eskom in 2015, but his tenure quickly became mired in serious allegations of corruption and facilitating the Gupta family's plundering of the power utility. His story is a tragic fall from grace, intertwined with the systematic weakening of a critical national asset. Under Molefe's leadership, Eskom allegedly became a key target for state capture. The Zondo Commission heard extensive evidence detailing how Molefe, along with other senior Eskom executives, allegedly made decisions that favored Gupta-linked companies, particularly Tegeta Exploration and Resources, which controversially acquired Optimum Coal Mine. This acquisition was reportedly facilitated by Eskom providing guarantees, prepayments, and unusually favorable coal contracts to Tegeta, often at a significant cost to Eskom and, by extension, the South African taxpayer. It was like Eskom was bending over backwards to help one specific, very connected mining company. The evidence presented included records of numerous phone calls between Molefe and members of the Gupta family, particularly during crucial periods related to these contentious deals. This, coupled with testimony from former Eskom officials and whistleblowers, painted a picture of a CEO who was allegedly deeply compromised and acting in the interests of the Guptas rather than Eskom. His infamous and tearful Saxonwold-Shabelle press conference attempting to explain his frequent presence in the Gupta neighborhood became a moment of national ridicule and did little to dispel the cloud of suspicion surrounding him. One of the most scandalous episodes was Molefe's early retirement and subsequent 30 million rand pension payout, which was later found to be unlawful and ordered to be repaid. This golden handshake for a relatively short period of service, especially amidst the growing evidence of his complicity in state capture, sparked public outrage and further highlighted the sense of impunity that seemed to pervade Eskom's leadership at the time. It felt like a reward for alleged malfeasance, rubbing salt in the wounds of a nation grappling with load shedding and soaring electricity prices. The consequences of this period of alleged misrule at Eskom have been catastrophic and long-lasting. The utility is now saddled with crippling debt, its aging infrastructure is failing, and South Africa endures regular power cuts, load shedding, that stifle economic growth, disrupt daily life, and disproportionately affect the poor. The systematic looting and mismanagement under leaders like Molefe directly contributed to this crisis, a crisis that will take years, if not decades, and hundreds of billions of rands to resolve. It's a stark example of how corruption at the top can switch the lights off for an entire nation. Brian Molefe, along with other former Eskom executives, now faces criminal charges related to fraud and corruption stemming from the Tegeta deals. While he maintains his innocence, his legacy is indelibly stained by the state capture allegations and the undeniable devastation wrought upon Eskom during his tenure. His story is a critical chapter in South Africa's corruption saga, demonstrating how even the most vital public institutions can be brought to the brink by compromised leadership and the predatory influence of corrupt networks. Malusi Gigaba is a politician who has held several key ministerial portfolios in the South African government, including Minister of Public Enterprises, Minister of Home Affairs, and, critically, Minister of Finance. His career has been marked by a rapid rise through the ranks, but also by a persistent trail of controversies and serious allegations linking him to the state capture project, particularly the Gupta family. It's like he was collecting influential positions, and with each one, the questions about his integrity and associations seemed to multiply. During his time as Minister of Public Enterprises, Gigaba was responsible for overseeing major state-owned companies like Eskom and Transnet. It was during this period that many of the appointments and decisions that allegedly facilitated state capture at these entities were made. The Zondo Commission heard testimony suggesting that Gigaba played a key role in appointing pliable boards and executives who would then enable the looting of these SOEs by Gupta-linked enterprises. He was, in essence, accused of being one of the architects who helped lay the groundwork for capture. His tenure as Minister of Home Affairs also came under intense scrutiny, particularly concerning the controversial early naturalization of several members of the Gupta family. This process, which normally takes many years, was allegedly fast-tracked under Gigaba's watch, raising questions about whether he abused his power to grant favors to the family who were, by then, already deeply enmeshed with powerful political figures. This wasn't just an administrative shortcut. It was seen by many as a clear indication of the Gupta's undue influence over key government ministers. Perhaps his most controversial appointment was as Minister of Finance, a role he held twice for relatively short but impactful periods. His appointment, particularly the first time, replacing the respected Pravin Gordhan, sent shockwaves through the markets, and was widely seen as a move to install someone more amenable to the state capture network's agenda at the helm of the National Treasury, one of the last bastions of resistance. Concerns were raised about his suitability for the role and his alleged proximity to those who sought to plunder state resources. Malusi Gigaba has consistently denied any wrongdoing and has defended his decisions, often claiming he acted in good faith or was merely implementing government policy. However, the sheer volume of testimony against him at the Zondo Commission, from former bodyguards detailing cash deliveries to his estranged wife's explosive claims about his dealings with the Guptas, painted a deeply compromising picture. His lifestyle, often perceived as lavish, also drew public criticism and calls for a lifestyle audit, fueling suspicions that his income did not match his expenditure. The cumulative effect of these allegations and controversies surrounding Malusi Gigaba highlights the pervasive nature of the state capture network and how it allegedly sought to place compromised individuals in strategic positions across government. His story is a stark reminder of the importance of vetting and scrutinizing those appointed to powerful public offices, and the devastating consequences when those individuals are perceived to prioritize personal or factional interests over their duty to the nation. Though he has not yet faced criminal charges related to state capture, the shadow of these allegations looms large over his political career. Mosebenzi Zwane is another figure whose name became synonymous with one of the most heartless and blatant examples of alleged corruption during the state capture era, the Vrede Dairy Project. Zwane served as the MEC for Agriculture in the Free State before being controversially elevated to the National Cabinet as Minister of Mineral Resources, a promotion that, many observers linked to his alleged loyalty to the Gupta family and his role in projects that benefited them. His career trajectory seemed to follow the path of those who allegedly served specific, powerful interests. The Vrede Dairy Project, as we touched upon earlier when discussing the Guptas, was intended to be a flagship empowerment project, designed to uplift poor black farmers in the Free State town of Vrede. Millions of rands of public money were poured into it. However, under Zwane's watch as MEC, the project allegedly became a vehicle for large-scale looting. Instead of empowering local farmers, vast sums were reportedly diverted to Gupta-linked companies, with very little tangible benefit reaching the intended beneficiaries, who were left with broken promises and shattered dreams. Zwane's alleged involvement didn't stop at the provincial level. Even after becoming Minister of Mineral Resources, he continued to be embroiled in controversies related to the Guptas. He was accused of using his ministerial position to improperly aid the Guptas in their acquisition of Optimum coal mine, including allegedly traveling to Switzerland to help them negotiate with Glencore, the mine's previous owner. This was seen as a blatant abuse of his office, using state resources and authority to advance the private business interests of his patrons. The Zondo Commission heard damning testimony about Zwane's conduct, painting him as a key facilitator for the Guptas within both provincial and national government structures. He was portrayed as someone willing to bend rules, issue questionable directives, and even mislead Parliament to protect and promote Gupta interests. His attempts to defend his actions often appeared weak and unconvincing in the face of overwhelming evidence, further solidifying the public perception of him as a captured minister. The human cost of the Vrede Dairy scandal, which Zwane allegedly presided over, is particularly tragic. The project was meant to bring hope and economic development to a marginalized community. Instead, it became a symbol of cynical greed, where funds meant for the poor were allegedly stolen to fund lavish lifestyles, including, as mentioned, the infamous Gupta wedding at Sun City. The images of the dilapidated farm and the disillusioned beneficiaries stand in stark contrast to the opulence enjoyed by those who allegedly plundered its resources. Mosebenzi Zwane now faces charges of fraud and corruption related to the Vredi Dairy project, a long overdue step towards accountability. His case highlights the devastating impact of corruption when it targets projects designed to uplift the most vulnerable members of society. It's a story of betrayal, not just of public funds, but of the very idea of empowerment and development. Zwane's alleged actions serve as a grim reminder of how deeply the tentacles of state capture reached, and the moral bankruptcy of those who would allegedly steal from the poor to enrich themselves and their allies. When you think about the government's most sacred duty, surely protecting and providing for its most vulnerable citizens ranks right at the top. That's what makes the saga of Bathabile Dlamini, former Minister of Social Development, and the social grants crisis so deeply disturbing. Dlamini presided over the South African Social Security Agency, or SASSA, responsible for distributing social grants to millions of impoverished South Africans, a lifeline for many. Yet her tenure was marked by controversy, mismanagement, and a near-catastrophic failure that threatened to leave millions without their vital support. The crisis reached its peak in 2017 when SASSA, under Dlamini's leadership, failed to find a new, lawful service provider to distribute social grants after its existing unlawful contract with Cash Paymaster Services was due to expire. Despite years of warnings and court orders to insource the payment system or find a legitimate alternative, Dlamini's department seemed to drag its feet, creating a situation where, at the 11th hour, they claimed only CPS could continue the payments, effectively trying to force the hand of the Constitutional Court to extend an illegal contract. It was a manufactured crisis, many argued. Dlamini's handling of the situation was widely condemned as incompetent at best, and deliberately obstructive at worst. She was accused of misleading the court, failing to take responsibility, and showing a shocking lack of urgency and concern for the millions of grant beneficiaries whose livelihoods hung in the balance. The Constitutional Court, in a series of scathing judgments, heavily criticized her conduct, eventually finding her personally liable for a portion of the legal costs due to her reckless and negligent behavior. This was an unprecedented rebuke for a sitting minister. Beyond the payment crisis, Dlamini's tenure was also dogged by allegations of corruption and wasteful expenditure within SASSA and the Department of Social Development. There were concerns about inflated contracts, questionable appointments, and a general culture of poor governance. Her own expensive stays in luxury hotels, paid for by the taxpayer, drew public ire, especially given her department's mandate to serve the poorest of the poor. It created a perception of a minister far removed from the realities of the people she was supposed to serve. Throughout the saga, Dlamini often appeared defiant and dismissive of criticism, sometimes making bizarre and inappropriate public statements that further damaged her credibility. She was eventually charged with perjury for allegedly lying under oath during an inquiry into her role in the social grants crisis, a charge for which she was later found guilty and sentenced to a fine or imprisonment. This conviction further underscored the serious questions about her integrity and fitness to hold public office. The story of Bathabile Dlamini and the SASSA crisis is a chilling example of how alleged incompetence and a disregard for accountability at the highest levels of government can directly threaten the well-being of the most vulnerable. It highlighted the critical importance of effective, ethical leadership in departments that deliver essential services. While the grants did eventually continue to be paid, averting a full-blown disaster, the crisis inflicted immense stress and uncertainty on millions and severely damaged public trust in a crucial government agency. It's a stark warning about what happens when those in power seemingly forget who they are truly there to serve. Our final spotlight falls on Nomvula Mokonyane, another prominent political figure who has held several ministerial positions, including Minister of Water and Sanitation and Minister of Environmental Affairs. Her name became heavily implicated in the Bosasa scandal, now known as African Global Operations, a company that allegedly bribed numerous government officials and politicians for years in exchange for lucrative state tenders. Mokonyane, often referred to as Mama Action, found herself at the center of explosive testimony, detailing a cozy and allegedly corrupt relationship with Bosasa. The Zondo Commission heard shocking allegations from former Bosasa COO Angelo Agrizzi and other witnesses about how the company allegedly lavished gifts, cash payments, and other benefits on Mokonyane. These included claims that Bosasa paid for her lavish 40th birthday party, provided regular cash deliveries, funded repairs and security upgrades at her home, and even supplied her family with Christmas groceries and meat for years. If true, this wasn't just friendly gift-giving. This was, according to the testimony, a systematic effort to buy influence and ensure her support for the company's interests. Mokonyane, during her time as Minister of Water and Sanitation, a department with a massive budget and significant procurement needs, was in a powerful position. The allegations suggested that Bosasa's generosity was aimed at securing and maintaining valuable contracts with her department and other state entities, where she held sway. The testimony painted a picture of a minister who was allegedly deeply compromised, her impartiality and decision-making potentially swayed by the illicit benefits she was receiving from a company doing business with the state. When confronted with these allegations at the Zondo Commission, Mokonyane vehemently denied them. Her testimony was often combative and contradictory, and she accused witnesses like Agrizzi of lying and having a personal vendetta against her. However, the detailed nature of the allegations, sometimes corroborated by other sources or circumstantial evidence, left a significant cloud of suspicion hanging over her. The commission itself, in its final report, made adverse findings against her, recommending further investigation for potential corruption. The Bosasa scandal, in general, exposed a deeply entrenched system of bribery and corruption that had allegedly infiltrated various levels of government for years. It showed how a private company could seemingly buy access and favors from influential politicians and officials, undermining procurement processes and defrauding the taxpayer of billions of rands. Mokonyane's alleged role in this network, as one of its prime beneficiaries, made her a poster child for this type of insidious, long-term corruption that erodes the very foundations of ethical governance. The legacy of Nomvula Mokonyane's alleged involvement with Bosasa serves as a potent example of the corrosive influence of private money in politics, and the devastating consequences when public officials allegedly prioritize personal enrichment over their sworn duties. It underscores the urgent need for robust anti-corruption mechanisms, transparent procurement processes, and a political culture that unequivocally rejects any form of bribery or undue influence. The fight for accountability in cases like hers is crucial to restoring public faith that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law when it comes to plundering state resources. So there you have it, a journey through some of the most prominent names and egregious alleged abuses of power that have scarred South Africa. From the highest office in the land to critical state-owned enterprises and government departments, the picture painted is one of systemic vulnerability and too often, brazen exploitation. These aren't just stories, they are indictments of a system that allowed such alleged widespread looting to occur, often at the expense of the poorest and most vulnerable citizens. The scale is staggering, the audacity breathtaking, and the impact on the nation's psyche and its future, profound. But this expose isn't meant to leave you feeling hopeless. Instead, it's a call to understanding, a call to awareness. Knowing the alleged depth and breadth of the problem is the first step towards demanding real, systemic change. The fight against corruption is far from over. In many ways, it's an ongoing battle that requires courage from whistleblowers, diligence from investigators and prosecutors, independence from the judiciary, and, most importantly, unwavering pressure from an informed and engaged citizenry. The names we've discussed today represent just a fraction of a much larger, more complex web. The future of South Africa hinges on its ability to confront this scourge head-on, to dismantle these networks of patronage and impunity, and to build institutions that are truly resilient against corruption. It requires a commitment to transparency, a culture of ethical leadership, and a zero-tolerance approach to those who seek to betray the public trust for personal gain. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and demand accountability. For more exposés, subscribe and hit the bell icon, because the more we shine a light on these dark corners, the harder it becomes for corruption to thrive.